The maintenance corridors of Frontier Station Omega hummed with the constant drone of life support systems, a sound Marcus Chen had grown accustomed to after 12 years of cleaning these forgotten passages. His weathered hands gripped the industrial mop handle as he made his way through Section C7, the most remote part of the station, where even the security patrols rarely ventured. At 45, Marcus had accepted his place in the universe's hierarchy. He was just another invisible human, keeping the gleaming corridors clean for the important people, the traders, diplomats, and military officers who conducted their business in the upper levels. The aliens barely acknowledged his existence, stepping around him as if he were part of the machinery. That's why the soft whimpering caught his attention immediately. In 15 years of working the night shift, Marcus had never heard a sound like that in these abandoned sections. He paused, listening carefully over the mechanical hum. There it was again, a quiet, heartbroken sobbing that seemed to echo from the emergency storage bay ahead. Marcus set down his mop bucket and approached cautiously. The storage bay's door hung partially open, its electronic lock flickering red, damaged, probably from the recent pirate raid that had struck the outer docking rings. Through the gap, he could see scattered debris and the twisted remains of what looked like a small escape pod, and huddled in the corner, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting, was a child. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in the low light. Her dark hair was matted and dirty, and her large eyes, a deep violet that seemed almost luminous, were filled with tears. She wore the tattered remains of what might once have been an elegant dress, now torn and stained with soot and engine coolant. When she saw Marcus, she pressed herself further into the corner, trembling. She spoke in a language he didn't recognize, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with terror and desperation. Hey, Marcus said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. It's okay, little one. I'm not going to hurt you. The girl stared at him with those enormous eyes, and Marcus felt his heart break a little. He'd seen that look before, on his own daughter's face, years ago, when the cancer treatments had made her so afraid of everyone in white coats. Sarah had been about this age when she'd looked at him with that same desperate need for someone, anyone, to make the fear go away. But Sarah had been gone for 7 years now, and Marcus had learned to live with that particular hollow space in his chest. "Are you hungry?" he asked, slowly reaching into his maintenance jacket and pulling out the protein bar he'd been saving for his meal break. The girl's eyes followed the movement, and he could see her swallow hard. She nodded once, barely perceptible. Marcus carefully placed the protein bar on the ground between them and stepped back. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Take it." After a long moment, she crept forward and snatched the bar, retreating immediately to her corner. She tore open the wrapper with desperate hunger, devouring the food in seconds. When she finished, she looked up at him again, and this time there was a different quality to her expression, still frightened, but with a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, settling down to sit cross-legged on the floor, making himself less imposing. She spoke again in her alien language, pointing to herself. The word sounded like Zara or something close to it. "Zara?" Marcus repeated, and her eyes widened in surprise. She nodded eagerly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips for just a moment. "I'm Marcus," he said, pointing to himself. "Marcus." "Marcus," she repeated carefully, her accent making his name sound musical and strange. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made them both freeze. Zara's eyes filled with terror again, and she shrank back into the shadows. Marcus could hear the distinctive clicking of Catherine boots, security patrol. Without thinking, Marcus stood and stepped protectively in front of the storage bay entrance, using his maintenance cart to partially block the view inside. "Evening, Chief Vextar," he said to the tall insectoid security officer, who rounded the corner, accompanied by 2 subordinates. The Catherine's compound eyes glittered in the dim light. "Human janitor, you are in restricted area. Debris cleanup was completed yesterday." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and respectful. "Just doing my regular maintenance sweep. Found some coolant leakage from the damaged pod that needed cleaning before it could eat through the deck plating." Vextar's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Efficient, humans good for such menial tasks." His gaze swept the corridor, and Marcus held his breath. "Report any salvageable technology found in debris. Command wishes inventory of pirate vessel remains." "Of course, sir. Nothing of value so far, just scrap metal and broken systems." The security chief nodded curtly and continued past with his patrol, their clicking footsteps fading into the distance. Marcus waited until he was certain they were gone, before turning back to the storage bay. Zara was staring at him with an expression of pure amazement, as if she couldn't believe someone had just protected her from the authorities. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but these seemed different, tears of relief rather than despair. Marcus knelt down again, his voice gentle. "It's okay, Zara. You're safe now. I'm going to help you, I promise." And as he looked into those luminous violet eyes, filled with gratitude and trust, Marcus Chen made a decision that would change not just his life, but the fate of galaxies yet unknown. He didn't know he was looking at the last heir of the Veltar Empire, or that her people had been searching the galaxy for their lost princess for 8 years. All he knew was that a child needed help, and that was enough. For the next 3 days, Marcus developed a routine that would have cost him his job, and possibly his life, if anyone had discovered it. During his shift, he would complete his assigned cleaning duties with meticulous efficiency, then slip away to the abandoned storage bay with whatever food he could spare from his own meals. Zara was slowly warming up to him. She had stopped cowering when he approached, and had even begun to venture out of her corner when he arrived. Her alien physiology was fascinating. The blue tint to her skin seemed to shift with her emotions, becoming deeper when she was afraid, and brightening to an almost silver hue when she was curious or happy. "Marcus," she said on the 4th night, her pronunciation of his name getting clearer. She pointed to the protein bar he'd brought, then made a gesture he was starting to recognize as thank you in her culture, pressing both hands to her heart and bowing her head slightly. "You're welcome, little star," he replied, using the nickname that had come naturally to him. Something about her luminous eyes reminded him of distant starlight. She tilted her head at the unfamiliar words, then smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her entire face, making her look like the child she truly was, rather than the traumatized refugee she'd become. Marcus had been doing research during his off hours, using his limited access to the station's database. The escape pod debris suggested she'd come from a ship using Veltar technology, an empire that had supposedly fallen decades ago in a civil war that had torn through 3 star systems. The official reports claimed no survivors, but clearly that wasn't entirely accurate. What worried him more were the recent bulletins he'd seen about increased Galactic Federation patrols searching for dangerous insurgents and Imperial remnants. The reward posted for information about Veltar survivors was substantial enough to tempt even honest citizens, and Marcus had learned long ago that not everyone in the galaxy valued a child's life over easy money. On the 5th night, everything changed. Marcus arrived at the storage bay to find Zara huddled in the corner again, but this time she wasn't alone. A small crystalline creature no bigger than his fist was nestled against her chest, its faceted surface glowing with a soft, warm light. "What do you have there, little star?" Marcus asked softly, settling into his usual spot on the floor. Zara looked up at him with those luminous eyes, then carefully lifted the creature for him to see. It looked like a living gemstone, with delicate wing-like projections that fluttered gently as it breathed. Its light pulsed in rhythm with Zara's heartbeat, and Marcus realized it was some kind of empathic companion, a pet perhaps, or something more symbiotic. "Kira," Zara said, stroking the creature with one finger. Then she launched into a stream of her native language, her voice animated for the first time since he'd found her. Though he couldn't understand the words, her tone and gestures told him everything he needed to know. She was explaining how the creature had found her, how it had been hiding in the wreckage all this time, probably scared and alone just like she had been. "Hello, Kira," Marcus said solemnly, extending one finger toward the crystalline being. To his surprise, it fluttered from Zara's hands to perch on his finger, its warm light washing over his weathered skin. For a moment he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a profound sense of peace and belonging. "She likes you," Zara said in accented but clear English, causing Marcus to start in surprise. "You speak standard?" he asked. Zara nodded shyly. "Learning, listening to you. Your words are kind like—" She searched for the word, then pressed her hands to her heart in her traditional gesture. "Like family." The word hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Family. It had been 7 years since Sarah died, 3 since his wife Elena had finally succumbed to the grief and taken her own life. He'd thought that part of him was buried with them, but this strange, luminous child was awakening something he'd believed was lost forever. "Zara," he said carefully, "where is your family? Your real family?" Her expression darkened, and the blue tint of her skin deepened to almost navy. "Gone," she whispered. "Bad men came. Ships with fire. Mama said run, hide, be safe. Put me in escape pod. Said she would follow, but—" She shook her head, tears gathering in her violet eyes. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, not at Zara, but at whatever monsters had destroyed this child's world and left her orphaned and alone. He'd seen enough of the galaxy's cruelty in his years on the frontier, but somehow this felt personal. "I'm sorry, little star," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "You help me," Zara said, looking directly into his eyes. "Why? Other people, they afraid of me. They hurt me, try to sell me. But you give food, keep me safe. Why?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Why was he risking everything for a child who wasn't even his species? Why was he defying regulations, lying to security, and potentially putting his own life in danger? The answer, when it came to him, was simpler than he'd expected. "Because you needed help," he said. "And because you remind me of my daughter. She died when she was about your age. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you." Zara stared at him for a long moment, processing this information. Then, without warning, she launched herself across the small space between them and wrapped her thin arms around his neck in a fierce hug. The crystalline creature, Kira, settled on his shoulder, its warm light enveloping them both. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for seeing me." As Marcus held this strange, precious child, feeling her trust and gratitude wash over him through her empathic companion, he made another decision. He couldn't keep her hidden in the storage bay forever. She needed proper food, clean clothes, medical attention, and most importantly, she needed safety. Even if it meant giving up the only life he'd known for the past 12 years, Marcus Chen was going to find a way to get Zara home, wherever that might be. He just had no idea that in trying to save one lost child, he was setting in motion events that would reshape the balance of power across 3 star systems and prove, once again, that the galaxy consistently underestimated the power of human compassion. Marcus had been caring for Zara for 2 weeks when his world came crashing down. He'd grown comfortable in their routine, too comfortable perhaps. The child was healthier now, her skin had regained its natural luminescence, and Kira, her crystalline companion, had become a source of constant wonder and comfort for them both. But comfort, Marcus learned, could be a dangerous thing in a galaxy where compassion was often seen as weakness. "Human janitor Chen, report to Security Chief Vextar immediately." The intercom crackled to life during his morning shift. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. In 12 years of working on Frontier Station Omega, he'd never been summoned to security. His hands trembled as he put away his cleaning supplies. Through their growing bond, Zara had been learning more standard English every day, and just yesterday she'd told him about her dreams. Nightmares, really. About soldiers in dark armor searching for her, about rewards posted for her capture, about terrible things that happened to her people. Marcus had promised her she was safe. Now he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. The security office was a stark metallic chamber designed to intimidate. Chief Vextar sat behind his desk, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. Beside him stood someone Marcus had hoped never to see, Commander Thexmore of the Galactic Federation Navy, a draconian whose scaled green skin and razor-sharp teeth had earned his species a reputation as the galaxy's most efficient enforcers. "Sit," Vextar commanded, gesturing to a chair that looked uncomfortably small for a human frame. Marcus sat, trying to keep his expression neutral. "Is there a problem, Chief?" Commander Thexmore leaned forward, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory intensity. "There have been reports of suspicious activity in the restricted sections, unauthorized access to debris fields, food supplies going missing. Care to explain?" "I've been doing my assigned cleaning duties," Marcus replied carefully. "Sometimes I find scattered rations in the debris. I assumed they were damaged goods from the pirate attack." Vextar's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the Kethran equivalent of a laugh. "Curious. Our records show you've been working overtime in sections that were already cleaned, sections where, coincidentally, our sensors have detected thermal anomalies consistent with organic life forms." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain calm. "The environmental systems in those areas are still being recalibrated after the attack. Thermal readings have been inconsistent throughout the station." Commander Thexmore stood and began pacing around Marcus's chair, a classic intimidation tactic. "You know, Chen, The Federation has been very interested in reports of Veltar survivors. There's quite a substantial reward for information leading to their capture, enough to buy a man a comfortable retirement on any of a dozen core worlds. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus met the Draconian's gaze steadily. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir. I'm just a janitor." "Just a janitor," Thexmore repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "Yes, that's what humans are good for, isn't it? Cleaning up the messes left by more important species. But sometimes, Chen, even janitors find valuable things in the trash." Marcus said nothing, but inside his mind was racing. They suspected, but they didn't know for certain. If he could just maintain his composure, maybe he could still protect Zara. "Very well," Vextar said finally. "You will accompany security team on inspection of sectors C7 through C12. Standard procedure to verify no salvage has been overlooked." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Of course, Chief. When would you like to conduct this inspection?" Commander Thexmore smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Marcus had ever seen. Right now. The walk through the maintenance corridors felt like a march to execution. Marcus led the way, his mind frantically trying to calculate angles, possibilities, any way to warn Zara or help her escape. But with 2 armed security officers flanking him and Commander Thexmore's predatory gaze boring into his back, his options seemed impossibly limited. As they approached Section C7, Marcus caught sight of something that made his heart skip. A faint, warm glow emanating from the direction of the storage bay, Kira's light, which meant Zara was still there, unaware that danger was approaching. "Thermal signature is stronger here," one of the security officers reported, consulting his scanner. "Indeed," Commander Thexmore said, his hand moving to rest on his weapon. "Shall we investigate, Janitor Chen?" Marcus had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the storage bay. 30 seconds to make a choice that would define not just his future, but Zara's life or death. He thought of his daughter Sarah, of the promise he'd made to her memory, to never again let a child suffer when he had the power to help. He thought of Zara's luminous eyes, full of trust and growing love. He thought of the way she'd called him family, the first time anyone had used that word about him in 3 years. "Actually," Marcus said, stopping so suddenly that the officer behind him nearly collided with his back, "there's something you should know." Commander Thexmore's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "Oh? There is a child in that storage bay," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "She's injured, scared, and alone. She's maybe 8 years old and she's been surviving on scraps for weeks." "Marcus, no." Zara's voice rang out from ahead of them, clear and desperate. She must have heard their voices, must have understood enough to know what was happening. "Run! Please run!" But Marcus didn't run. Instead, he stepped protectively in front of the storage bay entrance, spreading his arms wide. "If you want her," he said quietly, "you'll have to go through me." Commander Thexmore laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "How admirably foolish. One aging human janitor against trained Federation soldiers. What exactly do you think you can accomplish?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I can make sure that if you hurt her, everyone in the galaxy knows what kind of monsters the Federation employs. I can make sure that when the history of this moment is written, it's clear that at least one person tried to do the right thing." "You would throw your life away for an alien child?" Vextar asked, genuinely puzzled. "She's not an alien child," Marcus replied, and for the first time in the conversation, he smiled. "She's my daughter, and I protect my family." The words rang out in the corridor with quiet dignity, and for just a moment even the hardened Federation officers seemed taken aback by the simple, unshakable conviction in Marcus Chen's voice. Behind him, he could hear Zara crying, not with fear this time, but with something that sounded like pride. Whatever happened next, Marcus thought, at least she would know that someone had valued her life enough to fight for it, even if that someone was just a janitor. The standoff in the corridor stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Marcus stood with his arms spread wide, protecting the entrance to the storage bay where Zara waited. Behind him, he could hear her quiet sobbing and the gentle humming of Kira's crystalline form, sounds that somehow gave him strength. Commander Thexmore raised his weapon, the energy cell charging with an ominous whine. "Stand aside, human. Your noble sacrifice is pointless. The child will be captured regardless." "Maybe," Marcus said, his voice steady, "but at least she'll know that someone cared enough to try." Enough. The word rang out with such authority that everyone in the corridor froze. It hadn't come from any of the Federation officers. It had come from behind Marcus, from the storage bay itself. Zara stepped out from the shadows, and Marcus felt his breath catch. In the 2 weeks he'd been caring for her, he'd grown accustomed to seeing her as simply a frightened child. But now, as she emerged into the corridor's harsh lighting, something had fundamentally changed. She stood straighter, her chin raised with unmistakable dignity. The blue tint of her skin had deepened to a rich sapphire hue, and her violet eyes blazed with an inner fire that made them seem almost luminous in the dim light. Kira perched on her shoulder, the crystalline creature's glow now pulsing with what looked like barely contained power. Most striking of all, around her forehead was a thin circlet of silver that Marcus had never seen before. It seemed to have materialized from nowhere, glowing with the same soft light as her companion. "I am Zara Thex Velmorden, last daughter of the Veltar Empire," she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. "And you will not harm the man who saved my life." Commander Thexmore's weapon lowered slightly, his predatory confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Impossible," he breathed. "The Veltar bloodline ended at Kepler Prime. We have confirmation." "Your confirmation was wrong," Zara said simply, "as it so often is." Chief Vextar's compound eyes were fixed on the circlet around Zara's forehead, his mandibles clicking rapidly in what Marcus now recognized as extreme agitation. "The crown of stars," he whispered. "It cannot be. The imperial regalia was lost with the throne world." Zara touched the circlet gently, and it pulsed brighter for a moment. "The crown chooses its own bearer. It has been waiting, hidden with my people's last guardian, for the rightful heir to claim it." She gestured toward the debris in the storage bay. Kira was not just my companion, she was the keeper of the crown, waiting for me to be old enough and strong enough to accept my birthright. Marcus stared at the child. No, the young empress. He had been protecting, understanding finally flooding through him. The escape pod hadn't just been carrying a refugee, it had been carrying the last hope of an entire civilization. "Even if you are who you claim to be," Commander Thexmore said, trying to regain his composure, "you are still a wanted criminal. The Federation has jurisdiction here." Zara's eyes blazed brighter, and when she spoke, her voice carried echoes of power that seemed to resonate in the very walls around them. "The Federation has jurisdiction over subjects and citizens. I am neither. I am the rightful heir to an empire that predates your Federation by 3,000 years, and I am under the protection of someone who has shown me more honor than your entire civilization combined." She stepped forward, placing herself beside Marcus, rather than behind him. "This man found me when I was lost and afraid. He fed me when I was hungry. He protected me when I was in danger. He risked his life and his freedom to keep me safe, asking nothing in return but the chance to help a child in need." Kira launched herself from Zara's shoulder, her crystalline form beginning to change and expand. What had been a creature the size of Marcus's fist now grew to the size of a house cat, her faceted body throwing brilliant beams of light throughout the corridor. The Federation officers stepped back, shielding their eyes. "In my culture," Zara continued, her voice now carrying harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate directly in their bones, "such an act creates a bond more sacred than blood, stronger than law. Marcus Chen is now and forever my chosen family, under the protection of the Veltar crown. Any who would harm him must first face me." "You're just a child," Commander Thexmore snarled, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Zara smiled, and it was not the expression of a child anymore. "I am the last daughter of a warrior people. I carry the memories of my ancestors, the wisdom of my lineage, and the power of my crown. But more than that," she looked at Marcus with unmistakable affection, "I learned from the best teacher in the galaxy what it means to protect someone you love." The corridor filled with the sound of approaching footsteps, many footsteps, moving with military precision. Chief Vexitar's mandibles clicked frantically as he spoke into his communicator, but the device merely crackled with static. "Ah," Zara said mildly, "I should mention that Kira has been jamming your communications for the past few minutes, and those footsteps you're hearing, those would be the advance guard of my people's fleet, which has been searching for me for 8 years. Marcus felt his knees go weak. "Your people found you," Zara nodded, tears of joy now streaming down her luminous cheeks. "The crown called to them when I finally accepted it. They've been in hyperspace for days, racing to reach me." She squeezed his hand. "Racing to reach us." The first figure to round the corner was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with the same blue-tinted skin as Zara, but crossed with intricate silver tattoos that seemed to move in the light. He wore ceremonial armor that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced, and when he saw Zara, he dropped to one knee immediately. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, his voice deep and reverent, "we have searched across the stars for you." "I know, General Ketheva," Zara replied, and Marcus was amazed at how naturally the role of Empress seemed to fit her now. "And I am grateful. But before we leave this place, there is someone you must meet." She turned to Marcus, her violet eyes bright with affection and pride. "General, this is Marcus Chen, my savior, my protector, and my chosen father. He will be accorded all honors due to the imperial family, and he will come with us when we depart." The massive alien's eyes widened as he looked at Marcus, really looked at him, perhaps seeing him as more than just a human janitor for the first time. "Sir Marcus," General Kethvar said formally, inclining his head with genuine respect, "the Veltar Empire owes you a debt that can never be repaid. You have given us back our future." Marcus, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events, could only manage to say, She needed help." "Yes," the general said, and his smile was fierce and proud. "Exactly." Behind them, Commander Thexmore and his officers were backing away, clearly outnumbered and outmatched by the arriving Veltar forces. But Zara held up one hand, stopping her people's advance. "Commander Thexmore," she said quietly, "you may report to your superiors that the Veltar Empire has returned. We claim no territory that is not rightfully ours, threaten no people who have not threatened us. But know this, we protect our own and we have very long memories." The warning hung in the air like a blade, and Marcus saw the Federation officers' faces go pale as they finally understood the magnitude of what they were facing. The Lost Empire had found its heir, and she had learned the most dangerous lesson of all from a simple human janitor, that sometimes the greatest power in the universe comes from knowing when to show mercy and when to be absolutely ruthless in protecting those you love. The flagship of the Veltar fleet was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. The Starfire Ascendant stretched for kilometers, its hull a seamless blend of organic curves and crystalline growths that pulsed with the same gentle light as Kira's form. Walking through its corridors beside Zara, Marcus felt like he'd stepped into a living dream. "The ship grows," Zara explained, as they made their way toward what she called the heart chamber. She wore ceremonial robes now, deep blue fabric that seemed to shift like liquid starlight, with silver threading that matched the crown still resting on her brow. "Our technology isn't built, it's cultivated. Each vessel is a partnership between our people and the living crystal matrices that form the ship's consciousness." Marcus shook his head in wonder. "In 2 weeks, I went from mopping floors to walking through a sentient starship. I'm not sure my brain can process all this." Zara laughed. The same bright musical sound he remembered from their quiet moments in the storage bay, but now it echoed through corridors filled with purpose and hope instead of fear and hiding. "You'll adapt. Humans always do. It's one of the things I admire most about your people." They passed groups of Veltar crew members, each of whom bowed respectfully to Zara and nodded with genuine warmth to Marcus. The reverence they showed him wasn't forced or ceremonial. It was real, heartfelt gratitude from a people who understood that their future had been preserved by the kindness of a single human janitor. "They don't resent me?" Marcus asked quietly. "An outsider being given such honor in your culture?" Zara stopped walking and turned to face him, her violet eyes serious. "Marcus, do you understand what you did? Not just for me, but for all of us." He shrugged, still uncomfortable with the attention. "I helped a scared kid. Anyone would have—" "No," Zara interrupted firmly. "They wouldn't have. Commander Thexmore was right about one thing. There was a substantial reward for information about Veltar survivors, enough to set you up for life. You knew that, didn't you?" Marcus nodded reluctantly. He had seen the bounty notices, had understood exactly what turning Zara over to the Federation would have meant for his financial future. "And you chose to protect me anyway," Zara continued. "You chose to feed me from your own meals, to risk your job, your freedom, your life, for someone you'd known for days. Do you know how many people in this galaxy would make that choice?" Before Marcus could answer, they were interrupted by the arrival of General Kethvar, whose massive form filled the corridor. With him came a woman who took Marcus's breath away. She was clearly Veltar nobility, with the same luminous skin and violet eyes as Zara, but older, with silver threading through her dark hair and an aura of quiet strength that reminded him instantly of his late wife. Your Imperial Majesty, the general said formally, may I present Councillor Velanis, your former tutor and current head of the Imperial Council. The woman stepped forward and bowed deeply to Zara, but when she straightened, there were tears streaming down her luminous cheeks. My little star, she whispered, using words that made Marcus start in surprise, the same pet name he'd given Zara. We thought, when the throne world fell, when we couldn't find you, we thought we had lost everything. Zara moved into the woman's embrace, and for a moment she was just a child again, seeking comfort from someone who remembered her from before the tragedy that had shaped her life. I'm sorry, Auntie Vel. I'm sorry I was lost for so long. Lost but not alone, Velanis said, her eyes moving to Marcus. General Kethavar has told me of your protector. Sir Marcus, it is an honor to meet the man who gave our people back our future. Please, Marcus said, feeling overwhelmed by the formal address. Just Marcus is fine. I don't have any titles or... Oh, but you do, Zara said, stepping back from her mentor's embrace with a mischievous smile that was pure 8-year-old despite her imperial robes. Show him Auntie Vel. Councillor Velanis produced a small crystalline device that projected a holographic display in the air between them. The text was in the flowing script of the Veltar language, but as Marcus watched, it shifted to Standard Galactic. By imperial decree of Her Majesty, Zara Thex Velmordin, first of her name, Empress of the Veltar and Keeper of the Ancient Ways, Velanis read formally, Marcus Chen of Earth is hereby granted the title of Imperial Guardian, with all rights and privileges thereto, including adoption into the Imperial bloodline, as chosen father to the Empress. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Chosen father? It's the highest honor our people can bestow on someone outside our bloodline, General Kethavar explained. It grants you legal standing equivalent to blood family, with all the protections and responsibilities that entails. In the eyes of our people and our law, you are now the Empress's father in truth, as well as in her heart. Which means, Zara added with a grin, you're stuck with me forever. No takebacks. Marcus stared at the holographic document, then at this remarkable child who had somehow claimed him as family and made it official across star systems. Zara, I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, she said simply. Say you'll be my family, not because you have to, but because you want to. Say you'll help me rebuild our people and teach them what I learned from you about compassion and courage. Marcus looked around at the magnificent ship, at the alien technology beyond his understanding, at the formal robes and ceremonies and responsibilities that came with the title they wanted to give him. It was everything he'd never imagined wanting. Light years removed from the simple life he'd built as a janitor on a frontier station. Then he looked at Zara, at her luminous eyes full of hope and love, at the way she stood straighter when he was near, at the trust she placed in him, despite having every reason to fear adults after what she'd been through. He thought of his daughter Sarah, and how proud she would have been to know that her father had found another child to love and protect. Okay, he said quietly. Yes, I'll stay. Zara's face lit up like a star-going nova, and she launched herself into his arms, just as she had in that storage bay 2 weeks ago. But this time, she wasn't seeking protection from fear. She was celebrating the joy of coming home. As Marcus held his adopted daughter, surrounded by the loyal subjects of an empire he was now part of, he marveled at the strange path his life had taken. He'd started the month as an invisible janitor, cleaning up after more important people. Now he was an imperial guardian, trusted advisor to an empress, and father to a child who would reshape the balance of power in 3 star systems, and it had all begun with the simple decision to help someone who needed it. Welcome home, Dad, Zara whispered against his shoulder. Marcus Chen, formerly of Frontier Station Omega, currently of the Veltar Imperial Fleet, smiled and held his daughter closer. Welcome home, little star. 3 months had passed since Marcus had joined the Veltar Fleet, and he was still adjusting to his new reality. His quarters aboard the Starfire Ascendant were larger than any home he'd ever owned, with walls that could display any view in the galaxy and furniture that adapted to his needs. Through some form of crystalline consciousness, he still didn't fully understand. But the most profound change wasn't in his surroundings. It was in watching Zara grow into her role as Empress, while still remaining, fundamentally, the child he'd found crying in a storage bay. The Council of Admirals is requesting an audience, Your Majesty, General Kethavar announced as he entered the strategy room, where Zara was studying holographic star charts with Marcus beside her. Zara looked up from the display showing the current positions of various Federation and independent fleets. At 11 years old now, she had grown taller, and her features were beginning to show hints of the regal bearing that would one day make her truly formidable. But her eyes still held the warmth and curiosity that Marcus remembered from their first meeting. "What do they want to discuss?" she asked. "The Kepler offensive, Majesty. Admiral Vexthran believes we should strike now, while the Federation forces are divided dealing with the Outer Rim rebellions." Marcus watched Zara's expression carefully. He'd learned to read the subtle shifts in her skin tone that indicated her emotional state. Right now the blue was deepening toward troubled navy. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked, using the title that had become natural for both of them over the past months. Marcus considered the question seriously. His role as Imperial Guardian wasn't ceremonial. Zara genuinely sought his counsel on matters of state, and her advisors had learned to respect the insight of the former janitor, who seemed to understand their empress better than anyone. "What would striking accomplish?" he asked. "Beyond revenge, I mean." "It would reclaim 3 systems that were ours before the Civil War," General Kethvar said. "Systems with significant strategic and resource value. And how many people would die to take them back?" The general's expression tightened slightly. He'd grown to respect Marcus over the months, but the human's consistent focus on minimizing casualties sometimes frustrated the more militarily minded Veltar. "Victory requires sacrifice, Sir Marcus. The Federation won't simply hand over territory because we ask politely." "No," Marcus agreed, "but that doesn't mean we should default to violence as our first option." He looked at Zara. "What matters more to you? Getting those systems back or getting them back in a way that doesn't cost thousands of lives?" Zara studied the star chart for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Tell me about the people living in those systems now, General. Not the strategic value, the people." Kethvar consulted his tactical display. "Mixed populations. Roughly 40% human colonists, 30% Veltar civilians who remained after the annexation, 20% other Federation species, 10% independents. So 30% of the population are our own people," Zara mused. "And if we attack, they'll be caught in the crossfire along with everyone else. The Federation has been using them as human shields for years." Admiral Vexthran's voice came through the communication system as he joined the conversation remotely. "They knew this day would come. That doesn't make it acceptable to treat them as acceptable losses," Zara replied firmly, and Marcus felt a surge of pride at the steel in her young voice. "Your Majesty," Vexthran continued, "with respect, your father may have taught you compassion, but compassion without strength is merely weakness that invites exploitation." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and Marcus noticed that several of the crystalline control surfaces began glowing more intensely, a sign that Zara's emotional state was affecting the ship's living systems. "Admiral Vexthran," Zara said quietly, her voice carrying harmonics that made the words resonate in their bones, "my father taught me that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That includes our own people, even when it would be easier to sacrifice them for tactical advantage." She stood, and despite her small stature, her presence suddenly filled the room with imperial authority. "I will not begin my reign by treating Veltar lives as expendable. If we're going to reclaim those systems, we'll do it in a way that protects the innocent." "How do you propose we accomplish that, Majesty?" General Kethvar asked, his tone respectful but skeptical. Zara looked at Marcus, and he saw the same trust and reliance in her eyes that had been there when she was 8 years old and needed someone to believe in her. "Dad, you've seen how the Federation operates. You've worked among their people, seen their bureaucracy from the bottom up. What would you do?" Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Here he was, a former janitor being asked to devise military strategy for an interstellar empire. But as he looked at the star charts, at the distribution of populations and resources, an idea began to form. "What if we didn't attack at all?" he said slowly. "What if we offered the Federation something they want more than those 3 systems?" "Such as?" Admiral Vexthran's voice carried skeptical interest. "Peace," Marcus said simply. "A formal end to hostilities, recognition of current borders, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts. Everything they've been trying to achieve through force and intimidation, handed to them freely." The silence that followed was profound. "In exchange for what?" General Kethvar asked. "Free passage for any Veltar civilians who want to return to Imperial space, fair treatment for those who choose to stay, and formal recognition of the Veltar Empire as a sovereign power rather than a rebel faction." Zara's eyes were bright with understanding. It takes away their justification for treating our people as insurgents, and if they refuse, then they prove to the entire galaxy that they're not interested in peace, only in domination. Marcus finished. Public opinion is a powerful weapon, especially when dealing with a democracy like the Federation. Admiral Vexithran was quiet for several minutes, and Marcus could almost hear him running scenarios through his tactical computers. Finally he spoke. It could work. It would require significant diplomatic resources, and there's no guarantee they'll accept. But if they do accept, Zara said, we get what we want without a single shot being fired, and our people get to come home safely. And if they don't accept, General Kethvar added with growing enthusiasm, we have the moral high ground when we do have to use force. The other independent systems would be more likely to support us. Zara nodded decisively. Then that's what we'll do. Draft a formal proposal for a peace summit, include provisions for neutral arbitration, and make sure it's released to the galactic press at the same time we send it to the Federation Council. As her advisors moved to implement the plan, Zara remained beside Marcus, studying the star chart with new eyes. Do you think it will work? She asked quietly. Marcus considered the question honestly. I think it has a better chance than starting a war. And even if it doesn't work perfectly, you'll have shown your people and the galaxy what kind of leader you intend to be. The kind who learned from the best teacher she could have asked for, Zara said, leaning against his shoulder in a gesture that reminded him she was still, in many ways, just a child carrying an enormous burden. We taught each other, Marcus replied, putting an arm around his adopted daughter's shoulders. That's what families do. Outside the viewports, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the moment when an 11-year-old empress chose diplomacy over conquest, guided by the wisdom of a janitor who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply care enough to try. The neutral station of Harmony Point had been chosen for the peace summit precisely because no single power controlled it. Built at the convergence of 3 major trade routes, it served as a meeting ground for species who might otherwise never interact peacefully. Now, as Marcus walked beside Zara through its crystalline corridors, he marveled at the diversity of beings who had come to witness what the galactic press was calling the most significant diplomatic gathering in a generation. Zara, now 12, and showing more of her imperial bearing with each passing month, wore formal diplomatic robes of midnight blue with silver threading that seemed to capture starlight. The crown of stars rested on her brow, its gentle luminescence a constant reminder of the ancient authority she carried. Kira, now grown to the size of a large cat, walked beside them, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that reflected her bond with the young empress. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked quietly as they approached the main conference chamber. Zara considered the question with the seriousness he'd come to expect from her. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think." "What do you mean?" "I'm not afraid of the Federation delegates or even of failure," she said, pausing at the entrance to gather her thoughts. "I'm afraid of succeeding and then not being worthy of the peace we achieve." Marcus stopped walking and knelt to bring himself to her eye level, a gesture that had become their private ritual when she needed reassurance. "Zara, the fact that you worry about being worthy is exactly what makes you worthy. A leader who was certain they deserved power would be the last person who should have it." She smiled, the same bright expression he remembered from that storage bay, now refined by years of growth and responsibility, but no less genuine. "Did you know that when the Federation first received our peace proposal, half their council thought it was a trap?" "Was it?" Marcus asked with mock seriousness. "Only the best kind," Zara replied with a grin that reminded him she was still, in many ways, a precocious child. "The kind where everyone wins if they're smart enough to take it." The conference chamber was a marvel of engineering, with a circular table large enough to accommodate dozens of delegates while maintaining intimate conversation. Holographic displays showed real-time translations in hundreds of languages, and the lighting could be adjusted for the visual needs of any species present. Already seated were the key players in what many hoped would be a historic negotiation. Supreme Chancellor Trent of the Federation sat with his military advisors, including Commander Thexmore, who had requested specifically to be present after his encounter with Zara on Frontier Station Omega. Representing the independent systems were delegates from the Merchant Alliance, the Outer Rim Confederation, and several smaller powers who had much to gain from lasting peace. As Zara entered, Every being in the room stood in recognition of her imperial status. She acknowledged each delegation with the precise diplomatic courtesy she'd been learning from Councillor Valanis, but Marcus noticed the way her eyes lingered on Commander Thexmore. There was no animosity there. If anything, she seemed curious about the draconian who had once threatened her life. "Your Imperial Majesty," Chancellor Trent said as she took her seat, "the Federation appreciates your willingness to pursue diplomatic solutions to our disagreements." "The Veltar Empire has always preferred peace to war, Chancellor," Zara replied formally. "We seek only the return of our people and recognition of our sovereignty. These are not unreasonable requests." "Recognition, perhaps," Commander Thexmore interjected, his scaled features impassive. "But the return of your people could be interpreted as forced relocation of Federation citizens who happen to share your species." Marcus watched Zara carefully. This was the moment they'd prepared for, the attempt to paint their humanitarian goals as aggressive expansion. "Commander," Zara said, her voice carrying just enough harmonic resonance to command attention without being threatening, "I believe you and I have met before." Thexmore's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed, Your Majesty. On Frontier Station Omega 3 years ago. Do you remember what you learned that day?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, but not an aggressive one. Marcus could see that Zara was leading somewhere specific. "I learned that humans can be surprisingly stubborn when defending those they care about," Thexmore replied carefully. "And I learned that even those who see themselves as enemies can choose to show mercy when it matters," Zara said. "You could have killed my father that day. You had every legal justification and superior firepower, but you didn't. You chose restraint." Marcus blinked in surprise. He remembered the confrontation very differently. Thexmore had been ready to use lethal force, stopped only by Zara's revelation of her identity and the arrival of the Veltar fleet. But as he looked at the Draconian commander's expression, he realized Zara was right. In those crucial seconds before her people arrived, Thexmore could have fired, could have eliminated what he saw as a threat, but something had stayed his hand. Thexmore began, then stopped, looking genuinely confused. "I'm not certain why I hesitated." "Because you recognized something my father taught me," Zara said gently. "That true strength sometimes means choosing not to use the power you have, that protecting the innocent, even when they're not your own people, is what separates civilization from barbarism." She stood, and despite her youth, commanded the attention of every delegate in the room. "The Veltar Empire doesn't want to forcibly relocate anyone. We want to offer our people a choice. The same choice I was given 3 years ago when a human janitor decided that a scared alien child deserved help, not because of who she was, but because she needed it." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his adopted daughter transform their personal story into a bridge between civilizations. "We propose the establishment of voluntary relocation programs," Zara continued, "with full Federation oversight and independent monitoring. Any Veltar citizen who wishes to return to Imperial space may do so freely, with transportation and resettlement assistance. Those who choose to remain in Federation territory will be granted full citizen protections and representation." "And in return," Chancellor Trent asked, "the Veltar Empire formally recognizes current Federation borders, establishes full diplomatic relations, and opens our trade networks to Federation merchants. We also offer our assistance in humanitarian crises, our medical technology and disaster relief capabilities, at the service of anyone who needs them, regardless of political affiliation." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could see the delegates running calculations, considering angles, trying to find the catch in an offer that seemed almost too generous to be real. Finally, Commander Thexmore spoke. "Your Majesty, why? Why offer so much for so little? Your fleet could take those 3 systems by force if you chose." Zara smiled, and in that expression Marcus saw echoes of the frightened child who had trusted a stranger's kindness, the determined girl who had chosen diplomacy over revenge, and the wise young woman she was becoming. "Because, Commander, I had a very good teacher who showed me that the most powerful thing you can do is care about people who have no power to help you in return. The galaxy has had enough wars. It's time to try something different." She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every delegate present. "It's time to try compassion." Outside the station's viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, bearing witness to the moment when a 12-year-old empress offered to reshape the balance of galactic power with nothing more radical than the lessons she'd learned from a janitor who had once chosen kindness over profit, mercy over safety, and love over fear. The summit was far from over, but in that moment, Marcus Chen knew that whatever happened next, his daughter had already won the victory that mattered most. She had proven that strength and compassion were not opposites, but partners in creating the kind of future worth fighting for. The negotiations had been going for 18 hours straight, and Marcus could see the strain beginning to show on Zara's face, despite her diplomatic composure. The initial goodwill from her speech had gradually given way to the grinding reality of interstellar politics, with each delegation trying to extract maximum advantage from every clause and subsection. The Federation cannot guarantee the safety of voluntary relocation transports through contested space, Admiral Kessitar was saying, his tentacled form shifting colors in what Marcus had learned was a sign of cetacean frustration. The liability issues alone. Then perhaps the Federation should focus on making that space less contested, Councillor Velanis interjected smoothly. She had arrived that morning as part of Zara's expanded diplomatic team, and her centuries of experience were proving invaluable in navigating the bureaucratic maze. Chancellor Trent rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 60 years. Councillor, with respect, the Federation has been trying to stabilize the Outer Rim for decades. The pirate clans, the smuggling cartels, the independent militias, they don't recognize any government's authority. Funny thing about that, came a new voice from the chamber entrance. Every head turned as a figure strode into the room, someone Marcus recognized but had never expected to see in this context. Captain Sarah Voss of the independent freighter Lucky Strike was exactly as Marcus remembered her from their brief encounters on Frontier Station Omega, weathered, practical, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had survived everything the galaxy could throw at her. What was different was the delegation badge she wore and the half-dozen other independent captains who followed her into the chamber. "Captain Voss?" Chancellor Trent said, clearly as surprised as everyone else. "I wasn't aware the Merchant Alliance had invited additional representatives." "They didn't," Voss replied with a sardonic smile. "We invited ourselves, heard there was a discussion about cleaning up the Outer Rim, and figured someone should represent the people who actually live and work out there." Zara leaned forward with interest. "Captain, you have something to add to our negotiations?" "I have a reality check, Your Majesty," Voss said, settling into an unoccupied chair without ceremony. "You're all sitting here talking about contested space and liability issues like the Outer Rim is some kind of abstract problem to be solved by governments. But the truth is, most of the pirates and smugglers you're worried about are just people trying to survive in a region where the Federation can't or won't provide basic services." Commander Thexmore's scales shifted to a darker hue. "Captain, I hardly think glorifying criminal activity serves the cause of peace." "I'm not glorifying anything," Voss shot back. "I'm telling you that if you want to solve the security problem, you need to address the underlying causes. People turn to piracy when legitimate trade can't feed their families. They join smuggling rings when Federation taxes make legal commerce impossible. They form militias when there's no other protection against raiders." Marcus found himself nodding. This was exactly the kind of perspective he'd been hoping someone would bring to the negotiations, the voice of ordinary people trying to make their way in a galaxy dominated by vast political entities. "What would you suggest?" Zara asked, and Marcus could hear genuine curiosity in her voice. Captain Voss pulled out a portable holo display and activated it, showing a three-dimensional map of the Outer Rim territories. "Joint patrols," she said simply. "Federation, Veltar, and independent forces working together to provide actual security instead of just claiming jurisdiction they can't enforce. Shared customs stations, cooperative trade agreements, and, here's the radical part, local representation in whatever government they're supposed to answer to." The suggestion created an immediate buzz of conversation among the various delegations. Marcus could see the appeal of the idea, but also the enormous complexity it would involve. "Captain," Admiral Kessitar said carefully, "such an arrangement would require unprecedented cooperation between forces that have been adversaries for decades. The logistics alone would be handled by people who've been navigating those shipping lanes for their entire lives," Voss interrupted. "Look, I've been running cargo through the Rim for 20 years. I know every asteroid field, every hidden base, every shortcut between here and the galactic core. So do most of the independent captains. You want to clean up the region, partner with the people who actually understand it." Zara was studying the holographic display with intense concentration. "Captain Voss, Would the independent operators be willing to work with Veltar forces, given our complicated history? Voss looked directly at Zara, and Marcus was struck by the respect he saw in the veteran spacer's eyes. Your Majesty, 3 years ago I watched your father stand up to Federation security to protect a child he'd known for 2 weeks. If the Veltar Empire is led by people who learned that kind of courage, then yeah, I think we can work with you. Marcus felt a flush of pride, not just at the recognition, but at seeing how the ripple effects of that moment on Frontier Station Omega were still spreading outward, still influencing events he could never have imagined. There's something else, Zara said quietly, and Marcus could tell from her tone that she was about to take a significant risk. Something I haven't told this assembly yet. The chamber fell silent, all attention focused on the young empress. 2 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected massive fleet movements in the Andromeda approach. Ships using technology we don't recognize, heading toward our galaxy at significant fractions of light speed. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the subtle hum of the station's life support systems. Chancellor Trent was the first to speak. Are you saying we're facing an external threat? I'm saying we may be, Zara replied. Our analysts estimate 18 months before the first scouts reach our outer territories. We don't know if they're hostile, but given the size of the fleet, she let the implication hang in the air. Commander Thexmore leaned forward, his predatory instincts fully engaged. Why are you telling us this now? This information could have been valuable leverage in the negotiations. Zara met his gaze steadily. Because if we're right about what's coming, then our petty territorial disputes are going to seem pretty insignificant. The galaxy is going to need to be united, or at least capable of cooperation, if we want to survive what might be heading our way. Marcus watched the faces around the table as the full implications of Zara's revelation sank in. Political calculations were being rapidly revised, alliance priorities reshuffled, strategic thinking completely reframed. Your Majesty, Captain Voss said slowly, are you proposing what I think you're proposing? Zara nodded. I'm suggesting that instead of spending the next 18 months fighting over 3 star systems, we use that time to build the kind of cooperative infrastructure that could defend our entire galaxy. Joint patrols, shared intelligence, coordinated defense planning, all the things we've been discussing, but with a much more urgent timeline. And if the approaching fleet turns out to be peaceful explorers rather than invaders, Admiral Kessatar asked, then we'll have built a foundation for lasting cooperation that serves us well regardless, Zara replied. But if they are hostile, she stood, and once again, her presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. Then our children will thank us for putting aside our differences while we still could. The young empress looked around the table at the assembled delegates, Federation officials, independent captains, Veltar nobles, and representatives from a dozen other factions. The choice is ours and the clock is ticking. We can spend our remaining time fighting each other for scraps, or we can build something worthy of the civilizations we claim to represent. Marcus felt a profound sense of pride as he watched his adopted daughter transform a peace negotiation into something far more significant, a call to unity in the face of the unknown. She had learned well the lessons he'd tried to teach her, but she had taken them far beyond anything he could have imagined. The summit was no longer just about ending a conflict between the Federation and the Veltar Empire. It had become about preparing for whatever challenge lay ahead in the vast darkness between the stars, and at its heart was a 12-year-old girl who had never forgotten that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply care enough to try. The emergency klaxons of Terra Defense Command had been silent for so long that most people had forgotten what they sounded like. Now, as their harsh wail echoed through the underground bunkers beneath Geneva, Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. After 15 years of preparation, the moment they had all dreaded had finally arrived. "Sir Marcus, urgent communication from the Empress," came the voice of Lieutenant Chen, no relation despite the shared surname. But Marcus had taken a paternal interest in the young officer's career anyway. Some habits died hard. Marcus hurried to the main communications array, where holographic displays showed the defensive positions of 36 Allied fleets arrayed in concentric shells around the Sol system. It had taken 15 years to build this level of cooperation, but the Harmony Accords signed after that historic summit had held. Federation, Veltar, Independent, and dozens of other factions had worked together to create an integrated defense network that spanned half the galaxy. The central display shimmered and Zara's image appeared, no longer the 12-year-old girl from the peace negotiations, but a woman of 27 who had grown into every inch of her imperial bearing. Her ceremonial armor gleamed with crystalline inlays that pulsed with the same gentle light as Kira, who now perched on her shoulder in a form that looked more like living jewelry than a separate creature. "Dad," she said, and despite all her titles and responsibilities, the affection in her voice was exactly the same as when she'd been 8 years old and afraid. "The outer perimeter scouts are reporting contact. It's bigger than we expected." Marcus felt his heart sink. They'd been preparing for a large invasion force, but Zara's expression suggested their worst-case scenarios might have been optimistic. "How much bigger?" he asked. "Remember our estimates of 1,000 ships? Try 10,000. And they're not using any propulsion technology we recognize. Our physicists think they're manipulating space-time itself somehow." The magnitude of what they were facing hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even with 15 years of preparation, even with the greatest alliance in galactic history, how could they possibly stand against numbers like that? "There's more," Zara continued, and her voice carried a note he'd only heard a few times before, the sound of his daughter trying to be brave while dealing with something that terrified her. "They're not responding to any communication attempts. Every frequency, every protocol, every diplomatic contact method we've tried, nothing. Either they can't understand us, or they're not interested in talking." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, remembering a storage bay on Frontier Station Omega and a frightened child who had needed someone to believe in her. Now that child was empress of one of the galaxy's great powers, and she was looking to him for guidance in the face of impossible odds. "What's your gut feeling?" he asked. "Not as an empress, not as a military commander, but as my daughter who's always been good at reading people. What do you think they want?" Zara was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see her considering the question with the same careful thoughtfulness she'd shown even as a child. "I think they're afraid," she said finally. "Their formations are too rigid, too defensive for pure aggression, and the way they're approaching, it reminds me of how refugees move when they're desperate, but don't trust anyone enough to ask for help." "Refugees," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Running from what?" "That's what we need to find out. Dad, I know this is asking a lot, but—" She hesitated, and for a moment the composed empress gave way to the daughter who still sometimes needed reassurance. "Would you be willing to come up to the flagship? I could use your perspective on this. And if we're going to make contact with beings who might be as lost and scared as I was 15 years ago, you want someone who has experience with scared refugees," Marcus finished. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll take the next transport up." "Thank you," Zara said, relief evident in her voice. "And Dad, whatever happens in the next few hours, I want you to know that everything good in my life started the day you decided to help a frightened child instead of minding your own business." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus staring at the tactical displays showing impossible numbers of unknown ships bearing down on Earth and everything he'd spent his life protecting. At 60, he was no longer the maintenance worker who had stumbled across a lost princess. He was Sir Marcus Chen, Imperial Guardian of the Veltar Empire, architect of the Harmony Accords and one of the most respected diplomatic advisors in known space. But as he made his way to the transport bay, all he could think about was the 8-year-old girl who had trusted him to keep her safe, and how that trust had led them all to this moment when the fate of multiple civilizations might hang in the balance. 30 minutes later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Eternal Starfire, Zara's new flagship and the crown jewel of Veltar shipbuilding technology. The ship was magnificent, nearly twice the size of the old Starfire Ascendant, with crystalline growths that seemed to pulse with their own inner life, and weapon systems that existed in harmonious integration with the vessel's living consciousness. "Status report," Zara commanded, as Marcus joined her at the central command display. "Forward elements have entered the outer system," reported Admiral Kethvar, now showing his age but still commanding the Imperial fleet with undiminished skill. "Still no response to communication attempts. They're maintaining formation, but there's something odd about their approach vector." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. The Admiral highlighted a section of the tactical display. "Look at their trajectory. If they wanted to attack Earth directly, there's a much more efficient route that would avoid most of our defensive positions. But they're taking the long way around, almost as if they're trying to avoid unnecessary confrontation," Zara finished, "which supports the refugee hypothesis." She turned to Marcus. "What would you do if you were leading 10,000 ships full of desperate people into a star system? controlled by unknown aliens. Marcus studied the display, trying to put himself in the mind of whoever was commanding that massive fleet. I'd be trying to show strength while hoping I wouldn't have to use it, demonstrate that I'm not helpless, but also not commit to a fight I might not win. Exactly, Zara said, which means there might still be a chance for dialogue. She looked up at the main view screen, where the distant specks of the approaching fleet were just beginning to resolve into individual ship shapes. Dad, I'm about to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Marcus had learned to be wary when his daughter used that particular tone of voice. What did you have in mind? I'm going to meet them halfway, Zara said simply. Just us, in a single ship, with full diplomatic protocols and universal peace signals. If they're refugees, they'll understand the gesture. If they're conquerors, she shrugged, at least we'll know for certain. The bridge fell silent, as the implications of what she was proposing sank in. Admiral Kethvar was the first to speak. Your Majesty, with respect, that's suicide. We have no idea what their intentions are, what weapons they possess, or even if they understand the concept of diplomatic immunity. Which is exactly why it has to be me, Zara replied firmly. I'm the one person in this fleet whose death would send an unmistakable message about their intentions. If they're truly hostile, killing an empress who comes in peace will unite every species in this galaxy against them. If they're not, she looked at Marcus with eyes that held the same courage he remembered from a storage bay 15 years ago. Then maybe we can prevent a war that doesn't need to happen. Marcus felt pride and terror warring in his chest as he looked at this remarkable woman who had grown from the frightened child he'd once protected into someone willing to risk everything to protect others. All right, he said quietly, but if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Full ceremonial protocols, clear identification signals, and every diplomatic courtesy we can manage. If these beings understand civilization at all, they'll recognize what you're offering. Zara smiled, the same brilliant expression that had first made him think of Starlight all those years ago. I was hoping you'd say that, because if I'm going to bet the galaxy on the power of compassion, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have beside me than the man who taught me what that word means. As the Eternal Starfire changed course to intercept the approaching fleet, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had led him from a forgotten maintenance corridor to the center of galactic history. It had all started with a simple choice to help someone who needed it. Now, as they approached what might be the most important first contact in galactic history, he could only hope that the same simple human compassion that had saved one lost child might be enough to save them all. The lead ship of the unknown fleet was massive beyond anything Marcus had ever seen, easily 10 times the size of the Eternal Starfire, with a hull that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal caught in slow motion. No obvious weapons were visible, but something about its organic curve suggested destructive potential that made traditional military thinking obsolete. They're responding to our approach, reported Commander Veltish from the communications station. No words, but they're broadcasting what our xenolinguistics team thinks might be mathematical sequences, possibly an attempt to establish common ground for communication. Zara stood at the center of the bridge, her ceremonial armor gleaming in the soft light from the ship's crystalline systems. The crown of stars rested on her brow, but Marcus noticed she'd added something new, a simple pendant around her neck that he recognized as made from the same material as her old storage bay hideout. A reminder, perhaps, of where her journey had begun. Signal our intent to communicate, she ordered. Full diplomatic protocols, universal peace gestures, and transmit our historical database on first contact procedures. If they're scholars of civilization, they'll understand what we're trying to do. The massive alien vessel continued its approach, but Marcus noticed its escort ships were spreading out in what looked more like a protective formation than an attack posture. Whatever these beings were, they seemed as cautious about this encounter as Zara's people were. Your Majesty, came Admiral Kethvar's voice through the communication system from the fleet behind them. We're detecting massive energy buildups throughout their formation. Whatever technology they're using, it's beyond our current understanding. Acknowledged, Zara replied calmly. Maintain defensive positions, but do not power weapons unless directly fired upon. We're here to talk, not to fight. Marcus moved to stand beside his daughter, offering the quiet support he'd provided throughout her reign. How are you feeling about this? Terrified and hopeful in equal measure, she admitted quietly. Just like that night in the storage bay when you first found me. Before Marcus could respond, the main view screen flared with light as a transmission began. The image that appeared made everyone on the bridge gasp in surprise. The being facing them was clearly not humanoid, but there was something undeniably regal about its bearing. Its form seemed to be composed of the same flowing, liquid metal substance as their ships, constantly shifting, but maintaining an overall structure that suggested both strength and grace. What Marcus assumed were eyes, clusters of brilliant points of light, focused directly on Zara with unmistakable intelligence. When it spoke, the words came through their translation systems in a voice that resonated with harmonics, that made the ship's crystalline systems hum in sympathy. "I am Architect Prime Zephyran of the Wandering Cities," the being said, and there was something in its tone that Marcus recognized, the weariness of someone carrying an enormous burden. "You approach us with gestures of peace, yet we have learned to distrust such overtures. Too many worlds have greeted us with weapons disguised as welcome." Zara stepped forward, and Marcus was struck by how naturally she seemed to command attention, despite being dwarfed by the alien's projected image. "I am Empress Zarathex Velmordin of the Veltar Empire," she replied formally. "On behalf of the Allied Defense Fleet, I welcome you to our galaxy. We come in peace, but more than that, we come in understanding. We know what it means to be refugees searching for a home." The alien's form shifted, lights pulsing in patterns that might have indicated surprise. "Refugees? An interesting word choice, Empress. What makes you think we are displaced?" "Your formation patterns," Zara said simply. "The way you've approached our system, showing strength but avoiding unnecessary confrontation. The fact that you're broadcasting mathematical sequences instead of demands. These are the behaviors of people who hope for the best but prepare for the worst. I recognize them because I was once a refugee myself." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched Zara transform their personal history into a bridge of understanding with beings from another galaxy entirely. "Tell me, Architect Prime," Zara continued, "what are you running from? What brought the Wandering Cities to our galaxy?" Zephyran was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if the communication link had failed. When the alien finally spoke, its voice carried notes of grief that transcended species barriers. "We are the last of our kind," it said simply. "Our galaxy is gone, consumed by something we call the Silence, an expanding void that doesn't just destroy matter and energy, but erases the very possibility that they ever existed. We are 10,000 ships carrying the final remnants of 500 civilizations, searching for somewhere safe to preserve what we could save." The magnitude of the tragedy hit Marcus like a physical blow. An entire galaxy dead and gone, with only these ships remaining as proof it had ever existed. "How long have you been traveling?" Zara asked, her voice soft with compassion. 200 of your years, Zephyran replied. "Ship time. We have been scanning this galaxy for signs of intelligent life capable of understanding our situation. Your worlds show promise, but—" The alien paused. "We have learned to be cautious. Desperate refugees are not always welcomed, even by civilized species. Some worlds have turned you away," Zara said, and it wasn't a question. 3 systems on the outer rim of your galaxy, Zephyran confirmed. "We approached peacefully, explained our situation, asked only for permission to establish temporary colonies while we searched for uninhabited worlds to claim. In each case, the response was hostile." Marcus understood now why the Wandering Cities had approached with such massive numbers. They weren't conquerors. They were survivors who had learned that sometimes showing strength was the only way to be heard. "Architect Prime," Zara said, "on behalf of the Allied Defense Fleet and all member civilizations, I offer you formal sanctuary in our space. We have uninhabited systems that could support your people and the resources to help you establish permanent homes. But more than that, we offer you partnership. Your knowledge, your experience, your perspectives could benefit all our worlds." The alien's form shifted again, lights pulsing in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as patterns of hope and disbelief warring with each other. "You would do this? Welcome 10,000 ships full of strangers into your territory, trust beings whose technology you don't understand and whose intentions you cannot verify?" Zara smiled, and in that expression, Marcus saw echoes of every lesson they'd shared, every moment of growth and discovery that had brought them to this point. "Architect Prime, 15 years ago I was a frightened child hiding in a storage bay, alone and afraid, convinced that no one would help me, because I was different, because I was dangerous, because helping me would cost too much. But someone chose to see past all of that, to the person who just needed a chance. She gestured to Marcus, and he felt his cheeks warm as every being on both bridges turned to look at him. That man taught me that the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology or weapons or even love. It's the simple choice to help someone who needs it, even when it's difficult, even when it's risky, even when you have no guarantee they can help you in return. Zara's voice grew stronger, carrying the authority of an empress, but also the conviction of someone who had lived these truths rather than simply learned them. The Allied fleet exists because different species chose to trust each other despite centuries of conflict. Our defensive network succeeded because we decided to share resources instead of hoarding them. And now we're offering that same trust to you, because we've learned that the galaxy is always better when we choose compassion over fear. The silence that followed stretched for almost a full minute. Then, slowly, Architect Prime Zephran's form shifted into what Marcus instinctively recognized as a gesture of respect, perhaps even gratitude. "Empress Zara Thex Vel Mordin," the alien said, and its voice now carried harmonics that made every crystal on the ship sing with gentle resonance. "You offer us more than sanctuary. You offer us hope. The wandering cities accept your welcome, and we pledge our knowledge, our strength, and our loyalty to the alliance you have built." As the two fleets began the careful dance of integration, with Allied ships moving to escort the wandering cities to predetermined safe zones, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The frightened child he'd found in a storage bay had grown into a leader capable of preventing a war and saving an entire civilization with nothing more than the lessons he'd tried to teach her about simple human decency. But as he watched Zara coordinating with her admirals and beginning the complex process of integrating 10,000 refugee ships into galactic civilization, Marcus realized something that made him smile. She hadn't just learned his lessons, she had far exceeded them, taking the simple concept of helping someone in need and applying it on a scale that would reshape the balance of power across multiple galaxies. The 8-year-old girl who had once called him her chosen father had become the empress who chose to save the universe, one act of compassion at a time. 3 months had passed since the wandering cities joined the Allied fleet, and the integration process had gone more smoothly than anyone dared hope. The refugee ships had settled into temporary orbits around uninhabited worlds throughout Allied space, while their people worked alongside Federation scientists, Veltar engineers, and independent traders to establish permanent colonies. But as Marcus stood in the Strategic Planning Center aboard the Eternal Starfire, studying the holographic displays that showed the current state of their expanded alliance, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all living on borrowed time. "The energy signatures are unmistakable," Architect Prime Zephran was saying, its liquid metal form rippling with patterns that Marcus had learned to recognize as deep anxiety. "The silence has found our trail. It's following our path through intergalactic space." Zara, now wearing the practical uniform of a military commander rather than her ceremonial robes, studied the long-range sensor data with the same focused intensity Marcus remembered from her childhood. "How long do we have?" 6 months, perhaps 8 if we're fortunate, Zephran replied. "The silence moves slowly, but it's inexorable. It will consume everything in its path. Stars, planets, dark matter, even the fabric of space-time itself. And once it arrives, everyone dies," Admiral Kethvar finished grimly. "We've seen the sensor records from your galaxy's final days. This isn't a force we can fight with conventional weapons." Marcus moved closer to the central display, where a 3-dimensional map showed the approaching void as a sphere of absolute nothingness advancing steadily toward their galaxy. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. This thing had consumed an entire galaxy, billions of star systems, trillions of lives. "Zephran," he said quietly, "in all your people's research, have you found any indication of what this silence actually is? Where it came from?" The alien's form shifted in what Marcus had learned was the equivalent of a troubled sigh. "We have theories. Our greatest scientists believe it may be some form of universal correction mechanism, something that activates when the total complexity of organized matter and energy in a region reaches a critical threshold. A reset button for the universe," Zara said thoughtfully. "Something that wipes the slate clean when things get too complicated. Perhaps. Or it could be the result of some catastrophic experiment gone wrong, or a weapon of unimaginable power left behind by a vanished civilization. The truth is, we don't know, and we may never know. The silence doesn't just destroy, it retroactively erases the possibility that what it consumes ever existed." The strategic implications were staggering. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't just kill you, but makes it so you never existed in the first place. Your Majesty, came a new voice from the chamber entrance. Captain Sarah Voss strode in, still carrying herself with the same practical confidence Marcus remembered from the Peace Summit, but now wearing the insignia of the Allied Fleet's Independent Operations Division. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing in the Kepler sector. What kind of situation? Zara asked. Panic evacuations, Voss replied grimly. Word about the silence has leaked to the civilian population despite our security measures. 3 major colony worlds are trying to launch their entire populations in whatever ships they can find, and it's turning into chaos. Ships overloaded with refugees, inadequate supplies, no coordination or destination planning. Marcus felt his heart sink. They'd known this moment would come, the point where knowledge of the approaching threat would spread beyond their ability to contain it, but seeing it happen was still devastating. How many people are we talking about? Zara asked. About 12 million across the 3 systems, with more joining every hour as the news spreads. They're not just abandoning their homes, they're abandoning their worlds entirely, convinced that running deeper into the galaxy will somehow save them. Will it? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Architect Prime Zephran's form darkened. No. The silence will consume this entire galaxy, not just the outer rim. Distance will only delay the inevitable by months, maybe years at most, and 12 million refugees with no plan and inadequate resources. It paused. They'll die long before the silence reaches them. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, and Marcus could see her running calculations, weighing options, trying to find some way to save people who might not be savable. It was the same expression she'd worn as a child when faced with problems that seemed too big for someone her age to handle. We need to get out there, she said finally. Establish emergency coordination centers, set up supply lines, impose some kind of order on the evacuation before it becomes a complete disaster. Your Majesty, Admiral Kethvar said carefully, with respect, 12 million panicking civilians is not a military problem we can solve. Our resources are already stretched thin, integrating the wandering cities and preparing defenses against the silence. Then we make more resources, Zara replied firmly. We requisition every available transport, we open emergency supply depots, we draft every qualified pilot and navigator in Allied space. Whatever it takes. Marcus watched his daughter transform once again from the thoughtful strategist into the determined leader who refused to accept that some problems were unsolvable. But this time he could see the cost it was taking on her. Zara, he said gently, using her name instead of her title to signal this was a personal conversation, you can't save everyone. The numbers alone. Don't, she interrupted, her voice sharp with emotion. Don't tell me I can't save them. I've been hearing that my entire life, first about myself, then about our people, then about our empire. Every time we found a way. But this is different, Marcus continued, moving closer to her. This isn't a political crisis or a military threat we can outmaneuver. This is 12 million people trying to outrun the end of the universe itself. Zara turned to face him, and Marcus saw tears beginning to form in her luminous eyes. They're running because they're afraid, Dad. They're leaving their homes, their families, everything they've ever known because they don't see any other choice. How is that different from an 8-year-old girl hiding in a storage bay because she thinks no one will help her? The parallel hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was right, of course. The scale was vastly different, but the fundamental situation was the same. People in desperate need, convinced that no one cared enough to help them find a better solution. What did you have in mind? He asked quietly. Zara straightened, wiping away her tears and becoming the empress again. We go to them, not with military orders or evacuation procedures, but with the truth. We tell them what we know about the silence, what our options really are, and we give them the chance to make an informed choice about their future. And what are our options? Captain Voss asked. Zara looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every person present. We fight. Not with weapons. The silence can't be destroyed by conventional means. But maybe if we combine the knowledge of our alliance with the technology of the wandering cities, we can find a way to protect what matters most. Architect Prime Zephran's form rippled with what might have been hope. The Empress may be correct. There are theoretical possibilities we haven't fully explored. Dimensional barriers, temporal displacements, even the creation of isolated space-time pockets that might survive the silence's passage. Theoretical possibilities, Admiral Kethvar repeated. Your Majesty, you're asking 12 million people to bet their lives on theories. No, Zara corrected. I'm asking 12 million people to help us turn those theories into reality. Every one of those refugees has knowledge, skills, perspectives that could be crucial to finding a solution. Instead of treating them as a problem to be managed, we treat them as partners in solving the greatest challenge our civilizations have ever faced. Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride as he watched his daughter reframe the entire crisis. She wasn't just trying to save the refugees, she was trying to mobilize them as part of the solution. It's risky, he said. If we're wrong about the theoretical possibilities, we'll have given 12 million people false hope. And if we don't try, Zara replied, we'll have given them despair instead. Dad, you taught me that the most important thing you can do is help someone who needs it. Well, 12 million people need our help, and they need to know that someone still believes in possibilities. As they began planning the massive humanitarian and scientific mission that would either save millions of lives or become the greatest tragedy in galactic history, Marcus reflected on how far they'd all come from that night in a storage bay, when helping one frightened child had seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Now they were proposing to help 12 million frightened people while simultaneously attempting to solve a cosmic-scale disaster that had already destroyed an entire galaxy. But as he looked at Zara coordinating with admirals and scientists and refugee leaders, mobilizing resources and hope in equal measure, Marcus realized that the scale might have changed, but the fundamental principle remained the same. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept that the people who need help are beyond saving. 4 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the massive research station they had constructed at the edge of Allied space, watching as the most ambitious scientific endeavor in galactic history reached its climax. Around him, beings from hundreds of worlds worked side by side, Federation physicists collaborating with Veltar engineers, independent traders sharing navigation data with wandering cities architects, and refugee civilians contributing everything from artistic perspectives to manufacturing expertise. The silence was only 2 months away now, a sphere of absolute nothingness that had already begun to affect their long-range senses. But instead of despair, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected to experience in the face of cosmic annihilation: hope. "Dad, come look at this," Zara called from the Central Command Center. She had been working 18-hour days for weeks, coordinating research teams and resource allocation, while simultaneously managing the delicate politics of keeping dozens of civilizations focused on their common goal. Marcus made his way through the bustling corridors to where Zara stood beside a holographic display that showed the fruits of their collective labor. The image was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a vast network of interconnected energy fields that would encompass their entire galaxy, powered by the combined technological resources of every allied civilization. "The harmony field," Zara said, her voice carrying notes of exhausted triumph. "Architect Prime Zephran's dimensional barrier theory, combined with Federation quantum mechanics and Veltar crystalline resonance technology. If our calculations are correct, it should create a stable pocket of space-time that can exist independently of the local universe." "And if our calculations are wrong?" Marcus asked. "Then we'll find out together," came Architect Prime Zephran's voice as the alien joined them at the display. Over the months of working together, Marcus had grown to appreciate the quiet wisdom and determination of the wandering city's leader. "But Sir Marcus, I must tell you, the theoretical foundation for this project came from an unexpected source." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Your daughter asked us a question that our greatest scientists had never considered," Zephran explained. "She wanted to know what the silence actually was, not its mechanism or its origin, but its fundamental nature. When we investigated that question, we discovered something remarkable." Zara's eyes were bright with the excitement of discovery. "The silence isn't just destroying matter and energy, Dad. It's destroying information, the quantum patterns that define reality itself. But there's one type of information it can't touch, which is conscious memory," Zara said simply. "The records show that in every galaxy the silence has consumed, there were always a few isolated pockets where consciousness somehow persisted, not as physical beings, but as pure information patterns maintained by the act of remembering." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "You're saying the silence can't erase things that are actively remembered by conscious minds?" "Exactly. And if that's true, then the harmony field doesn't need to be a physical barrier. It needs to be a consciousness amplifier, A way to make every sentient being in the galaxy simultaneously aware of and actively remembering everything we want to preserve. The implications were staggering. Marcus looked around at the research station, at the millions of beings working together to save their worlds, and began to understand what his daughter was proposing. "You want to turn the entire galactic population into a living memory bank," he said. "More than that," Zara replied. "We want to turn them into a family. Every person, every civilization, every world actively choosing to remember and protect, not just their own history, but everyone else's. The silence feeds on isolation, on the gradual forgetting that lets civilizations drift apart. But if we're all connected, if we all care about preserving each other, then we become something the silence can't destroy," Marcus finished, feeling awe at the audacity and beauty of the concept. "The technical requirements are enormous," Architect Prime Zephran warned. "We'll need quantum resonators on every inhabited world, consciousness amplifiers in every major population center, and perfect synchronization across multiple star systems. One failure point could doom entire sectors." "Then we won't have any failure points," came Captain Voss's voice as she approached their group. "The Independent Pilots Union has already volunteered to handle the final distribution network. We know every trade route, every hidden colony, every forgotten outpost in Allied space. If there are conscious beings out there who need to be connected to the network, we'll find them." Marcus watched as the plan took shape around them, driven by the same simple principle that had guided every major decision in Zara's reign: the absolute refusal to abandon people who needed help. But this time, the scope was beyond anything he could have imagined. "Your Majesty," came an urgent voice from the communication station. "We're receiving priority transmissions from the outer monitoring stations. The silence has accelerated. We have less time than projected." The holographic display shifted to show updated sensor readings, and Marcus felt his blood turn cold. The advancing wall of nothingness had somehow increased its speed, consuming the remaining distance between galaxies at a rate that defied their previous calculations. "How long?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the news. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if we're lucky." A moment of profound silence settled over the command center as the full implications sank in. 6 weeks to complete a project they had planned to take 3 months, coordinate the consciousness of billions of beings across hundreds of worlds, and test a theoretical defense against a force that had already destroyed an entire galaxy. "Well," Zara said finally, "I guess we'd better get started." What followed was the most intense period of cooperation in galactic history. The Harmony Field Network came online piece by piece, powered by energy contributions from every allied world, and guided by the collective will of beings who had chosen to trust each other with their very existence. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, not as a military strategist or technological expert, but as the person who had taught the architect of this miracle what it meant to care for others. Zara relied on his counsel for the countless decisions that arose every hour, but more than that, she seemed to draw strength from his presence as the deadline approached. On the final day, as the silence reached the edge of their galaxy and began its inexorable advance toward the core worlds, Marcus stood beside his daughter in the primary control center. Around them, displays showed the status of quantum resonators on 10,000 worlds, consciousness amplifiers connecting billions of minds, and energy patterns that represented the hopes and memories of every civilization in known space. "Field synchronization at 98%, reported the lead technician. "All resonator stations reporting full connectivity. We're as ready as we're ever going to be." Zara nodded, then activated the galaxy-wide communication network that would carry her voice to every connected world simultaneously. "Citizens of the Allied territories," she began, her words echoing across star systems, "in a few hours, our galaxy will face the greatest challenge in its history. But we will not face it alone. We are connected now, not just by technology, but by choice, by the decision to care about people we've never met, to preserve civilizations we've never visited, to remember stories that aren't our own." Marcus watched the displays as billions of conscious minds focused their attention on the same moment, the same purpose, the same desperate hope. "The silence comes to erase us from existence," Zara continued, "but it cannot erase what we choose to remember together. Hold tight to your memories, not just of your own lives, but of everyone you've ever cared about. Remember your families, your friends, your neighbors. Remember the strangers who showed you kindness. Remember the worlds you've visited and the ones you've only dreamed of. Remember that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. The silence struck the outer rim of the galaxy, and reality began to unravel at the quantum level. But as it advanced, something unprecedented happened. It slowed. The expanding wall of nothingness met the harmony field and found something it couldn't process: billions of conscious minds actively choosing to remember, to preserve, to protect. "It's working," breathed Architect Prime Zephyron. "The field is holding. The silence is confused. It doesn't know how to erase something that exists in active memory across multiple dimensions of consciousness." For 6 hours, the battle raged at the level of pure information, reality itself becoming the battlefield between destruction and preservation. And slowly, impossibly, the silence began to retreat, not defeated, but baffled by an opponent it had never encountered before. As the crisis passed and the galaxy settled into an exhausted but victorious calm, Marcus found himself alone with Zara on the observation deck where their journey had begun that day. "We did it," Zara said quietly, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it. We saved everyone." Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, marveling at how the frightened child he'd found in a storage bay had become the woman who had just saved multiple civilizations by teaching them to care about each other. "You did it," he corrected gently. "You took a simple lesson about helping people who need it and turned it into something that could stand against the end of the universe itself." Zara leaned against his shoulder, and for a moment she was just his little star again, tired after a long day of being braver than anyone should have to be. "I had a good teacher," she said simply. Outside the viewports, the stars shone with renewed brilliance, each one representing worlds where billions of beings had chosen to remember, to care, to protect. The galaxy had been saved not by superior technology or military might, but by the simple human truth that Marcus had learned long ago in the maintenance corridors of a frontier station. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is help someone who needs it, even if that someone is an entire galaxy full of strangers who have become family through the simple act of choosing to remember that they matter. The silence had been turned back, but more importantly, it had been replaced by something infinitely more powerful: the light of consciousness, choosing to shine in the darkness, powered by love that refused to let anything precious be forgotten. And it had all begun with a janitor who decided that a crying child deserved help, no matter what it might cost him. Some lessons, Marcus reflected, as he held his daughter under the saved stars, were worth everything.